Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Speech Collective podcast, where we help and inspire others to overcome their speech impediments. I'm your host, David Rosen. Today's episode is truly special. It's a full circle moment for me. I have the privilege of sitting down with the very first person who detected my speech impediment when I was just 3 years old, Sarenne Sutton. Sarenne was assigned by the city of New York to evaluate me and help me begin my speech journey. She's been working in education for over 22 years. After earning her degree in special education from NYU, she began her career as a special education teacher at Eagle Hill School in Connecticut. Later, she returned to New York to earn her Master's of Science in Speech Language Pathology from Teachers College, Columbia University. Since 2009, Sarenne has worked as a bilingual speech-language pathologist in a variety of roles, from early intervention and preschool programs to supervising SLPs. For the past decade, she's been focused on supporting middle and high school students with learning disabilities. Currently, she works as a middle school speech-language pathologist at the Shefa School and also provides one-on-one tutoring in reading, writing, math, and decoding after school. She's also a proud mother of two. We're honored to have Sarenne with us today to discuss her career, her passion for speech therapy, and her advice for others navigating speech challenges. Sarenne, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Let's go ahead and get started with our questions. To begin, could you please describe how you came to be in your current position? What initially attracted you to speech therapy, and what steps did you take to arrive at your current position?
So originally, I was a special education teacher. I had a passion for education and working with students who struggled. So I became a special education teacher. I went to NYU and earned my degree, and I started working at a fantastic school called Eagle Hill. And while I was there, I learned what speech-language pathologists do because I had one come into my classroom. And I loved the work she was doing with the students. It was so targeted, and she had so much knowledge that I didn't have yet. So I decided after 3 years that I wanted to specialize and pursue my career in speech-language pathology.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. I would like to contextualize your work in specific scenarios. So for example, when you first met me, what was your initial assessment of my late speaking? How did you initially think about helping me progress my speech?
So I knew you lived in a bilingual home. I speak Hebrew as well. So standardized assessments on their own are not going to do much to assess you. So there were observations, there were discussions with your parents and your caregivers to figure out what was going on with you. And of course, we would interact so I could get a sense and a feel for your communication skills. And you had very strong communication skills. You knew how to get people to know what you wanted. You would point, you would look at people. You were very connected to everyone. You loved sharing your things and showing everyone your trains and your shoes. You just weren't talking. So it was just that one piece of the puzzle that was missing for you, but everything else was in place. So after the assessment, it was clear that that's the one thing we needed to work on, as opposed to sometimes kids aren't understanding or don't want to connect or have difficulty in those areas. You really just had difficulty producing speech. So that was the focus of what we worked on.
Wow. Following up on that point, what would you say your typical client looks like?
So my typical client today, since I work in a middle school, is a middle schooler with learning disabilities. So maybe a middle schooler with dyslexia who has trouble reading or writing, or students who have trouble expressing themselves and organizing their thoughts. So that's what my typical student looks like today. When I was working with you, my typical child looked like maybe like you, or any young child who wasn't communicating for any other reason. So it's changed over the years, but I enjoy working with all of the different age groups.
Since I haven't seen you for 14 years, and it's been a while since we've sat face to face, how do you stay current with evidence-based practices in speech therapy, such as the Doctor Fluency program, which assisted me? Do you find yourself using more technology or AI in your sessions?
That's a great question, and I absolutely do. Just the nature of working with middle schoolers has caused me to use more technology because they're using more technology. And I have to be on track with what they're doing for school and in their own lives. So in terms of continuing education, part of being a speech-language pathologist, every 3 years, we need 30 hours of continuing education credits. So depending on what my position is, I find coursework that aligns with what I'm doing. And a lot of times technology is involved in that. I've learned a lot from my students in the last few years how to use editing apps to help with writing and get suggestions and get feedback. So that's something I've been using more with students. What you mentioned in terms of fluency is not something I'm familiar with, only because I haven't been working in that area in the last few years. But I'm sure that those programs are very effective, and you could teach me about them right now.
Thank you. That being said, let's move on to your approach to a potential new client. Could you please share with us how you conduct an initial assessment for a new client?
Absolutely. So standardized assessments are a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. There are a lot of different facets of, children and their behaviors and students and their work. So the first thing, we'll sometimes start with some sort of standardized assessment. There are always going to be conversations with parents and teachers to kind of get an idea of what's going on with the student or the child in the home and in the classroom. There are going to be observations. So I would want to observe the child or the student in class, at home. There are rating scales. So some developmental norms where you just check off, like if kids have reached those, if they're doing things at certain ages that you would expect. So sometimes that would be appropriate. They're all different pieces of this big evaluation puzzle that we have to do.
Have you ever had parents who thought that their child had a speech impediment, but in reality, maybe they were just a late speaker or something small was off with them, not like a bigger issue?
Yes. So that's happened when parents don't know what the developmental norms are. They may compare their children to a small group of other children they know. So if a child can't say the R sound, at the age of 4, that's still developmentally appropriate, but some parents think you need intervention at that point, and you really don't. Another issue that's come up is when children are bilingual and they make errors that parents, or sometimes more often it's teachers, think that they're disorders, but they're not, because they're speaking in their bilingual tongue, but in English. So for example, like in Hebrew, you would say like, ani lo rotze, I don't want.
Yeah.
And in English, you can't say I no want, right?
Yeah,
You say I don't want. But if a child who is exposed to Hebrew says I no want, that's totally developmentally appropriate when they're learning to speak, if they're also learning to speak in Hebrew. So a lot of times, parents or teachers think that students have disorders or delays that aren't necessarily problematic.
Great. I'd like to now discuss the scope of the type of clients you work with. Could you please provide an example of how you've adapted therapy for a client with complex needs or unusual, like not typical needs?
Sure. Would you prefer I talk about an older client or a younger client?
Up to you.
Okay. So I think a very important part of therapy is developing rapport with your clients. And sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's more difficult. And at one point I worked at a high school for students who had emotional disabilities, and they had a really hard time connecting. So establishing rapport took a very long time. But we would have to take sessions to really develop that relationship before we could target any actual language goals, because if they had no interest in talking to me and communicating with me, then we're not going to make any progress. So we had to spend a lot of time getting to know each other. And I found that very challenging with high schoolers who have so many other issues going on beyond language. Like to them, language isn't important and it's not their main concern. But I know that it will help them in the future. So figuring out how to build that bridge is very challenging, but it is rewarding and it works.
And how different is that for a younger student?
So I find that for younger kids, it's often easier because younger kids like toys most of the time and stickers. And it's easier to use play therapy. So with younger kids and with you, I would use play therapy. I don't know if you remember, but we played with your trains a lot and we built train tracks.
I remember I like trains.
Yes, that we always used your trains because you like trains.
And cars.
And the shoes. You remember the shoes?
Yeah.
So those are the words we used and the materials we used to elicit language from you. With an older client, it's a little more difficult because you're in a school, you're in an office, you can't just take toys out. It's harder to find those things to connect with. So with younger clients, I've found it easier. But sometimes with younger clients too, they're not interested in making that connection with an adult. So that is definitely challenging. And I found that using parents to help or caregivers has been very effective.
Expanding the scope of the conversation to include the greater community, do you often involve parents, teachers, or caregivers in the therapy process?
I always do initially because you have to. You can't, communication doesn't happen in a bubble. It happens everywhere. So if I'm working with a client and we make progress in that half hour, if the parent doesn't know about it or a teacher doesn't know about it, then it probably will not go anywhere, right? My goal is for my clients to take what I'm doing with them and use it elsewhere.
Yes.
But then other people need to know what we're doing. So I've found that communication is a very important part of therapy. And parents tend to appreciate it, and students appreciate it.
Thank you. Let's expand now to Greater New York. As you know, New York City is an incredibly diverse place. Can you describe your approach to treating clients from diverse cultural or linguistic backgrounds? I think you touched on that a little bit, but...
Definitely. So part of my program at Teachers College was the Bilingual Extension Institute, and that was an extension we could do when I was in graduate school, and it was to get your bilingual extension and learn about how to work with bilingual students. Now, all speech pathologists should know how to work with bilingual and multicultural students, but this really went deep into analyzing language, and I took a test at the end that gave me certification to work in the DOE as a bilingual speech-language therapist. So that coursework was invaluable. It really taught me so much about multicultural assessment and bilingual and multilingual assessment. So how do I approach it is what I told you. So first, I have to know about the student's language and culture. If I don't know about that, I can't accurately assess them. Yeah. A good example of that is eye contact. So when I work with young children, I often look to see if they're making eye contact and engaging with me in terms of communication. And in some cultures, children are taught not to make eye contact with adults, that it's a disrespectful thing to do. So if I didn't know that and a child was not making eye contact with me, I might assume there was some communication issue and they were not engaged. So that is a very concrete example of why I have to know what the student's culture is, what their language background is, so I don't mark errors where there aren't errors, because I want the assessment to be accurate. And parents are the ones to really talk to, which is another reason I have to talk to parents, because if I don't have this information, I won't know what's going on with the child.
Transitioning to the duration of a potential client's progress, how do you handle a situation when a child's progress is slower than expected?
So that's a good question. And a lot of times we don't know how long things will take. But in early intervention, we keep track of data, and in schools, we usually have IEPs or report cards and goals. So if we see that progress isn't being made, there are a few things I do. And the first one is evaluating what my goals are for the student or the child. Maybe they're too big. So I break the goals down to smaller goals and see what are the small goals I need to reach this bigger goal. And then I try to meet those goals first. So I might change the actual goals to make them more attainable. I speak to other people in the child's life to find out if something's going on, because sometimes there's something going on that's preventing the child from making progress, something in the family or their community that I don't know about, but may be impacting their progress. I always talk to coworkers. I love the field of speech-language pathology because everyone works together. There's always somebody I can call to get ideas from and advice from. So it's a nice community of professionals that I can always ask for more ideas from. So those are the different steps I usually take if I'm seeing that progress isn't being made.
And for my final question, I'd like to ask you personally, and please answer how you see fit. What are your long-term goals in this field?
So for the last 10 years or so, I've been working in middle school and high schools, and I love working with that population, but I do miss working in early intervention and supervising SLPs as well. So I'm hoping down the line to find positions where I can balance that out more and focus on different facets of the field instead of being with one age group, because I really do miss working with the little kids.
Yeah.
Because that's fun too.
Thank you very much, Sarenne. As you know, this is very special. We haven't seen each other for 14 years, and I'm glad we got to sit down and talk. And with that, that's going to wrap up the 4th episode of the Speech Collective podcast. Thank you very much, Sarenne. This was very special for me to get to hear you again and get to hear your insights.
Thank you. It's so nice to sit here and talk to you.
Thank you for coming on to the podcast. And everyone, please follow and subscribe to our podcast for the next episode. Until then, see you next time.